Inside American statehouses today, lobbyists are pushing for new laws against Hinduphobia. A century ago in Tokyo, imperial officials spread quiet rumors that the Japanese emperor had converted to Islam. Two writers show how these vastly different moments share a strategy, manufacturing a religious narrative to gain power. Raju Rajagopal tracks how modern Hindu nationalist groups use claims of religious persecution to shield themselves from political criticism in the United States. Looking backward, Mimi Hanaoka uncovers Japan's early 20th century campaign to court Muslim allies and build an anti-Western coalition across Asia. Placing these histories together reveals something striking about how easily faith is put to work when a political movement needs to secure its flanks. In an essay published this week, Raju Rajagopal looks at how Hindu nationalist groups in the U.S. use laws against Hinduphobia to shield themselves from political criticism. Pay attention to the specific local tensions he describes in Frisco, Texas. He points out that as the town's Indian population has grown, the resulting hostility from the American right looks remarkably similar to the anti-Muslim hate spread by Hindu supremacists.
America has been our happy home for nearly 60 years. My wife and I remain deeply grateful to this welcoming society, which has allowed us to be part of the American dream in every way. But we have never been as concerned as we are now for our family and for our democracy. Our children and grandchildren are quintessentially American, yet their appearance will always set them apart. It would break our hearts if someday a stranger were to yell at them, "Go back to India." Our concern is not unfounded, given the dramatic increase in hostility towards Indians. It began with the H-1B visa controversy and has grown more vocal and more hostile since. Texas, with its large Hindu and Muslim populations, has become a focal point for segments of the MAGA right who openly display bigotry and xenophobia. Hindus for Human Rights, of which I am a co-founder, has denounced these disturbing developments in the strongest terms. Hindus and Muslims are not taking over Texas, said Riya Chakrabarti, Senior Policy Director. We are building homes, raising families, serving our communities, praying in our own traditions, and contributing to the shared civic life of this country. As a Hindu Texan, I know how Hindu and Muslim Texans have made Texas stronger. As an immigrant who arrived in the 1960s, I have long been aware of the undercurrent of racial supremacy among segments of white conservatives, especially after being physically assaulted by a racist white man in 1969. Ugly though the incident was, it never shook my belief in the decency of most Americans. So it is shocking to hear otherwise decent people openly expressing hatred for Hindus. Unfortunately, all it takes today is news of an Indian involved in a scam or a viral video of troubling behavior abroad to trigger a fresh round of online hostility. Increasingly, anti-Indian hate from the MAGA right resembles the anti-Muslim hate expressed by Hindu supremacists. India hate did not develop overnight. It began with the H-1B controversy during US President Donald Trump's second term, followed by numerous reported cases of alleged visa fraud involving Indians. The hostility has snowballed ever since. In Frisco, Texas, where 20% of residents are Indian, the city council has become a battleground between older conservative residents worried about cultural invasion and newer Indian residents.
Criticisms of Indians have included alleged reluctance to assimilate, concerns about civic engagement, and accusations of insular business practices, often framed through nativist and xenophobic rhetoric. It is not my place to pass judgment on either the criticisms or the community's responses. Perhaps heightened public scrutiny is exacerbating mistrust. Perhaps increased exposure to India's seamier side through proliferating video content is generating more scorn. How did the H-1B controversy escalate so rapidly into disdain for Indians? Why do Hindutva organizations continue to advance claims of Hinduphobia instead of joining others to confront the common threat of MAGA, white or evangelical supremacy? And are Hindus guilty of double standards when they decry Hindu hate in America while supporting anti-minority policies institutionalized by the Modi government? These are questions worth pondering as we brace for more attacks on immigrant communities before the midterm elections in November. But first, a quick update on Federal Bureau of Investigation hate crime statistics, which I have reported on annually. Anti-Hindu hate crimes still low. Year after year, anti-Hindu hate crimes have remained at the lowest end of the 34 categories tracked, alongside Buddhists, Hawaiians, and Jehovah's Witnesses, while Sikhs, Muslims, and Jews are many times more likely to face hate crimes. Data from the FBI shows that hate crimes against most communities either trended downward or held steady during 2024 to 2026, contrary to claims of a surge in anti-Hindu or anti-Jewish hate crimes. Since Georgia has legislatively condemned Hinduphobia and anti-Hindu bigotry, I examined FBI data for the state. To my surprise, there was only one anti-Hindu crime over the last 5 years, classified as vandalism. In the same period, there were 18 anti-Sikh, 6 anti-Muslim, 42 anti-Jewish, and 99 anti-white hate crimes. Unreported bias incidents may exist, but that is true for all communities. This raises the question: why are Georgia lawmakers so eager to champion only one faith community, Hindus, who appear to face little or no hate crimes in the state? New epicenter of Hindutva influence. One answer may be that Hindutva organizations in Georgia have been highly effective in influencing lawmakers. A notable example is House Resolution 701 condemning Hinduphobia and anti-Hindu bigotry, championed by the Coalition of Hindus of North America.
It was strongly supported by Congressman Sanford Bishop, a civil rights stalwart who has become a close ally of Hindutva groups. Unsurprisingly, the resolution was introduced and passed on the same day, March 27, 2023, with little scrutiny or debate. Republican sponsors of the resolution had also received over $80,000 in donations from a political action committee calling itself Hindus of Georgia. The resolution is symbolic, yet it legitimizes the working definition of Hinduphobia created by an alliance of Hindutva organizations in 2022. Quote, a set of antagonistic, destructive, and derogatory attitudes and behaviors towards Sanatana Dharma, Hinduism, and Hindus that may manifest as prejudice, fear, or hatred. An extensive search for data supporting claims of widespread Hinduphobia yielded no evidence. Why choose Georgia, a state with virtually no anti-Hindu hate crimes, to push such resolutions? Likely because it offered an easy legislative pathway to legitimize the working definition and weaponize it against critics. Journalist Peter Friedrich has publicly testified about how such definitions could be used to silence dissent. Quote, is documenting RSS history an antagonistic attitude towards Hinduism? Is citing human rights reports about the 2002 Gujarat pogrom derogatory towards Hinduism? Is quoting RSS founders' destructive behavior?
Perhaps prosecutors can define what an attitude is. Perhaps they can distinguish between criticizing RSS and being derogatory towards Hinduism. Perhaps. Or perhaps the vagueness is the weapon. Pushed by this Hindu nationalist network, Georgia writes Hinduphobia into its civil rights law. Also, in an obvious attempt to frustrate scholars of Hinduism, the Hindu American Foundation maintains a growing list of terms that it considers anti-Hindu or Hinduphobic. For example, Brahmanism, Savarna, Hindutvadi, Bhakt, and so on, which are frequently used in academia. The Hindu American Foundation also makes a transparent attempt to parrot the Zionists. There are also those who deny the existence of Hinduphobia and anti-Hindu hatred, which in itself can be a manifestation of Hinduphobia and anti-Hindu hatred. In my view, the working definition attempts to emulate efforts by certain pro-Israel advocacy groups to broaden the definition of anti-Semitism. Many American Jews reject that expanded definition, yet it was officially adopted by the Trump administration. I am certain that over time, many Indians and Hindus will also reject Hindutva's expansive definition of Hinduphobia. The working definition explicitly targets academia. Hinduphobia is exacerbated and institutionalized by some in academia who support the dismantling of Hinduism and accuse its sacred texts and cultural practices of violence and oppression. By this logic, scholars who critique caste oppression, including those citing B.R. Ambedkar, are guilty of institutionalizing Hinduphobia. This is deeply troubling. As I have stated repeatedly, I condemn all forms of bigotry and hate. But the commonly understood definition of phobia, that is, extreme or irrational fear or aversion, simply does not apply to anti-Hindu incidents in America. Perhaps recognizing this, Hindutva organizations now promote resolutions like HR 69 without defining Hinduphobia, confident they can insert their preferred definition later. The Georgian descent. Mario Naufal, a popular host on X, posted on June 24, 2026 that Georgia had outlawed Hinduphobia and anti-Hindu bigotry and made them crimes. He was referring to HR 701, which passed, and SB 375, which would have criminalized Hinduphobia but did not pass. His misstatement involuntarily triggered widespread outrage among Georgians, who suddenly grasped the implications of these seemingly innocuous legislative actions.
Reviewing more than 1,000 comments opposing HR 701 and SB 375, see NDTV and RT.com, it became clear that Hindutva organizations had scored a self-goal by drawing attention to their efforts to secure special protections for Hindus, protections no other community has sought. That and other objections raised by Georgians are highlighted below. Diaspora's Hindu khatre mein hai. House Resolution 69, introduced in early 2025 by Representative Shri Thanedar of Michigan, claims that according to the FBI, quote, anti-Hindu hate crimes targeting mandirs and persons are annually on the rise, end quote. This is false. As noted earlier, anti-Hindu hate crimes have remained level for 5 years. Despite strong objections raised in Georgia, Hindutva organizations continue to push HR 69. Distressingly, 4 out of 5 Indian Hindu members of Congress have co-sponsored it, despite the likelihood that it could be weaponized to intimidate Indian Americans who oppose Hindutva ideology. Endorsing HR 69 would undermine the trust of non-Hindu Indian Americans. Why are Hindutva organizations so fixated on portraying Hinduphobia as a major threat? At one level, the answer mirrors the fundamental dogma in India that Hinduism is perpetually endangered by Islam and Christianity. Hindu khatre mein hai.
The slogan, which means Hindus are in danger, has long served as a rallying cry and justification for hostility towards minorities. At another level, Hindu victimhood is central to Hindutva organizations' messaging and fundraising in America. In this narrative, school textbooks describing caste, scholars critiquing Hindutva, Dalits advocating for caste discrimination protections, and Sikhs supporting laws against transnational repression are all labeled Hinduphobic. The good news is that younger Indian Americans, with access to abundant images and commentary from India, can now independently assess the realities. Exaggerated claims by Hindutva groups are being increasingly challenged, sometimes aided by AI tools. The pretense that Hindutva organizations alone define Hinduism or Hinduphobia has been exposed. Recent student protests in Delhi and other cities, led by the satirical Cockroach Janata Party, show how quickly power dynamics can shift through savvy use of social media. If the enthusiasm displayed by Gen Z during solidarity demonstrations across America is any indication, a Cockroach USA party may be emerging, ready to challenge entrenched dynamics in diaspora politics and help end hate and supremacy in our communities.
Raju Rajagopal leaves you watching a very modern political fight in the Texas suburbs. In town council meetings and statehouses, organizations are trying to engineer a specific religious narrative, loud claims of Hinduphobia, to carve out power and deflect criticism. It looks like a localized response to the current American immigration debate. Mimi Hanaoka turns the page to a completely different century and continent, but she exposes a surprisingly similar playbook. Her historical account looks at imperial Japan in the early 1900s. Instead of using religious identity as a defensive shield, the Japanese government used it as bait. They let a wild rumor fly that their emperor was converting to Islam, all to court Muslim allies across Asia and build an anti-Western coalition. Notice what surfaces when you put these two strategies side by side. The shared assumption is that religious identity is just another tool to be manipulated for influence. Rajagopal's account of Texas lobbying feels highly specific to modern conservative politics. But read alongside Hanaoka, those contemporary claims of religious persecution start to look less like a spontaneous reaction to local bigotry and more like a century-old strategy of using a sacred identity for a calculated secular advantage.
A recent increase in anti-immigrant sentiment in Japan has led people from some religious and ethnic groups who were not born in Japan to face hostility. Hate speech has spread on social media, and some mosques have been targeted with abusive messages. Over the past 5 years, the number of Muslims in Japan has nearly doubled, from 230,000 in 2019 to 420,000 at the end of 2024. Most Muslim immigrants are workers from Southeast Asia and South Asia. All this has been unfolding amid a larger demographic change. The population of mixed-race Japanese children, known as hafu, or half, has also increased in Japan over the past 3 decades. The number of children born in Japan who have 1 or 2 non-Japanese parents reached 4.66% in 2023, up from just 1.3% in 1987. A long-standing myth that Japan is a homogenous society, which has often been linked to Japanese racial purity, has exacerbated anxieties over demographic change. This is despite the reality that Japan has its own indigenous population in the north of the archipelago, known as the Ainu, as well as generations of Japanese of ethnically Korean, Chinese, and Ryukyu, or Okinawan, heritage to complicate the landscape.
Along with Japan's falling birth rate, these immigration patterns have accelerated fears among politicians and ordinary Japanese alike about racial purity and what constitutes Japaneseness. What many don't know is that Japan has a largely forgotten and complex relationship with Islam and Muslims that predates contemporary immigration patterns. As a Japanese scholar of Islam, I have studied how Muslims perceived Japan during the 19th and early 20th century. In the early 20th century, the Japanese government used positive perceptions of Japan among Muslims to build alliances with Muslims across Asia as part of its geopolitical strategy. Rumors of Japan's conversion to Islam. Unlike much of Asia, Japan was never colonized. Instead, in the late 19th century, Japan started to build its own empire, exerting influence over Korea as well as Manchuria, an important area of modern-day China that borders Korea, Russia, and Mongolia. Japan's victory over Russia in the Russo-Japanese War of 1904-05 established it as a major world power. For the Muslim-majority regions that had once seen themselves as centers of learning and power, European domination over parts of Asia, including South Asia and Southeast Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, was seen as humiliating. Muslim thinkers debated how to revitalize their societies and overcome colonial domination. For some Muslim intellectuals and travelers, Japan's modernization and its victory over Russia was proof that Asian nations need not be subservient to Europe or abandon their own cultural traditions. Japan's victory over Russia inspired such admiration that it gave rise to an unlikely, false rumor around the time of the Russo-Japanese War. The Japanese emperor would soon convert to Islam. According to these circulating reports, the Japanese population too would also convert out of loyalty to their emperor. These rumors may have started in India and subsequently circulated in Indonesia, then a Dutch colony. People believed that a newly Muslim Japan would lead the Muslims of Asia in anti-colonial resistance against the West. At the time, steamships and the printing press enabled people and ideas to travel farther and faster across the globe than ever before. Newspapers in Arabic, Urdu, and Persian, published in cities such as Bombay, now Mumbai, Calcutta or Kolkata, Istanbul, London, and Cairo, helped in spreading religious and political ideas across the globe. Despite this publishing boom from the 1860s to the 1920s, however, most people in South Asia, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East still had little direct knowledge of Japan. That lack of first-hand knowledge made it easier for the rumors to spread and seem credible. For many Muslim reformers, Japan represented a non-Western model of modernity. Egyptian activist and lawyer Mustafa Kemal Pasha described Japan as the rising sun to Egypt's sun that is already set. He saw Japan as an emerging global power, at a time when Egypt had fallen behind economically, militarily, and intellectually. How Japan made use of the rumors. The rumors, while untrue, did offer Japan an opportunity to position itself as an anti-colonial leader. Japanese military intelligence seized on the potential of finding allies among the world's Muslims. Important figures in Japanese military intelligence supported an ideological movement called Pan-Asianism. This movement sought to promote the political, cultural, and economic unity of Asian peoples under Japanese leadership by stressing their common Asian heritage. Secretive Japanese Pan-Asianist organizations cultivated alliances and met with Muslims to build networks with Muslims in China, Russia, and India. Japan sought to build alliances against Russia, Great Britain, and other European nations. One notable Pan-Asianist group was the Kukurukai, or Black Dragon Society, founded in 1901. Black Dragon Society members forged relationships with Muslim nationalists in Russia and in the Ottoman Empire in order to build a pro-Japanese network. One of the members of the Black Dragon Society was Omar Yamaoka, born Yamaoka Kotaro.
Yamaoka was among a handful of Japanese Muslims who had converted to Islam as a political and strategic act, while remaining ideologically committed to Japanese imperialism, the Japanese emperor, and Shinto as a religion. Japanese Muslims like Yamaoka could travel throughout Muslim-majority countries without attracting unnecessary attention. They could build networks and report their findings back to the military in Japan. Complex pasts. For decades, Japan continued with this strategy and even developed an Islam policy in the 1930s. The goal of Japan's Islam policy, or Kaiko Seisaku, was to build Japan's sphere of influence across Asia. It fostered alliances with Muslims in China, Russia, Central Asia and the Caucasus, Southeast Asia, and India as part of this policy. Japan's empire expanded in the decades leading up to World War II. However, it collapsed when Japan experienced a catastrophic defeat in 1945. Japan was occupied by the United States, and the emperor was stripped of his semi-divine status. In the decades since then, Japan has largely adopted a pacifist stance that disavows its imperial past. Today, amid Japan's shrinking population and anti-immigrant sentiment, it might be jarring to remember that there once were hopes that Japan would be the anti-colonial leader of the world's Muslims, and that some of Asia's Muslims dreamed of an Islamic Republic of Japan.
What lingers here is how easily the sacred gets turned into a shield or a recruitment poster. A whispered rumor about an emperor in Tokyo and a drafted bill in an American statehouse both do the exact same work. They dress raw political ambition in the untouchable language of faith, daring anyone to object. It leaves a quiet, difficult question behind. When political organizers start using a religion just to build empires or deflect criticism, how do everyday believers protect their faith from the people claiming to defend it?